Go on.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Topical Talkology. And
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Theo. You good?
I'm very good indeed. How are you?
Yeah, not bad. It's been actually a busy week. We've kept on missing each other, really, so we're having to do this again on a Saturday. Anyway, one of the things we really wanted to talk to you about today, because there's been a lot in the news, and it sort of stemmed from what's happening in the Conservative leadership race between God knows how many of the candidates ago. Well, actually, I think it's down to just a few now, isn't it?
It is down to a few. Although the Conservatives, some people in the Conservatives are now saying, let's just crown BJ leader rather than going through weeks and weeks of infighting.
Yeah, saying that, when I think one of the times when David Davis actually went to run for leader, he was actually well ahead in the early stages and actually petered off after that. So it's not a given that he will be, although it does look the most likely.
David Davis gave that shameful performance during Brexit and not understanding really what Brexit meant. That David Davis. No comment on that one. I don't know enough about what he said on that side. Anyway, but one of the things that came out this week, or last week rather, was about Michael Gove. I think who came third in the leadership race, who actually came out and said that he took cocaine when he was about 30 years old, several times when he was a journalist, and as a result of that, he very deeply regrets what he's actually done, and because he knows of the damage it can do. And he also talked about banning teachers who'd actually taken cocaine, so who'd taken drugs. So that did come out as a little bit hypocritical on that side of things. However, there is some little factors there that people actually haven't picked up on, because one thing he did say about the banning of the teachers taking drugs, and they shouldn't be taking drugs, particularly when they're looking after children, because the thing is they're not then fully functional, cognitively functional to be able to do that. But the teachers don't get banned if they've taken drugs before they were teachers, like if they were in university. But if they were actually in caring for children, because let's face it, they haven't got all their faculties together. So when he came out and he said he deeply regrets it and things, and I saw him on television. Now I think he's a little. I'm going to not lie to you. I think Michael Gove's a little bit of a weasel. He looks a bit like a weasel, actually. He's got quite slimy. And he hasn't actually got a face to be actually leader of the political, But you're not discriminating on looks.
I am indeed, because the thing is, it is not based on
visually
how good
challenged.
It really is. It is. But the thing is, it's not that. You've got to go on a subconscious level, because if you actually look at his facial features, it lacks strength of character. Now, that may not necessarily be the case, but it doesn't matter whether it's true or not. It matters what the public actually believe to be true. Now, if they perceive him to be or looking weaker or slimy, which is how I see him, and that's my own point of view, then the public are more likely to dismiss him as well because of that. But unfortunately, the way the Tories work, they don't get selected on whether the public choose him. They get selected on whether the other candidates choose him. So there's going to be a lot of internal politics going on over there. So one of the things these Tory MPs have got to make clear is, actually, if you are going to win the next general election, you've got to pick someone who's going to potentially be the likes of Jeremy Corbyn. All right? And the thing is, they are actually the salesmen, they are the face, they are the figureheads of the party. They're not necessarily the smartest. And this was actually very clear when it came to things like, I remember when George W. Bush went for, I think he was going for a term against Al Gore. And the Republicans actually played it beautifully on that one, because they would sort of say, actually, George W. Bush may not be the smartest person in the world, but he's got a team of experts around him who can advise. Whereas Al Gore has no heart, type thing, as though he was robotic, he was unemotional, he wasn't empathetic. And that's what they built their whole campaign on. And bear in mind, we select people on how it's seeded to us, how it's conditioned to us, and how it's, and it comes down to ultimately perceptive selection. Who's the biggest, who's the tallest, who's the one who stands out the most, who's the one who's maybe most trustworthy, all these sort of things. So when Michael Gove comes out on screen and says, "Oh, I've taken these, I took these drugs and I deeply regret it," actually, I lost a lot of respect for him, not because he's actually taken drugs. But the fact is, I'd rather have had more. I think I've had more risk from me. He says, do you know what? I took them at a time in my life. That was the circumstances. Do you know what? I'll hold myself accountable to that. I don't take it anymore now. I'm a minister because I've got different responsibilities. So be it. Not saying something to the public that the public are then, that's gonna make him more electable. The only thing he regrets is that it could actually impact his chances. But I think he would have had more character if he'd actually turned around and said, do you know what? I took it. It was a time in my life. So be it.
It's very difficult to know what's going on, isn't it? Because right now, the key strategy that you have to take is to self-expose all your skeletons if you think they're going to come out. Because it's the same when you're in court, and the barrister at the open will first of all bring up and accept some of the worst points of the case, rather than the opposing barrister doing it. Because if you say it minimises the damage. So there is that, or he knows that he comes across as a bit of a wet smack, and maybe the fact that he took cocaine gives him this special, hard sheen to him.
Then own it. Don't regret it.
But you see, he's a bit of a slime ball. So he can't even do that properly.
That is the problem. But let me ask you a question, Thea, because this is a question I actually put up online. And I got a couple of replies on Facebook, but none on LinkedIn. Sometimes people aren't just willing to go there on that matter. And the question I was asked was, is it better to actually have a leader who's squeaky clean, who's not prepared to be who's so risk averse, is not willing to take any chances, or do you want someone who's picked up a few scars along the way, got a bit of history, a bit of experience, has a better understanding of what's actually going on around, and you know what? He's willing to be a little bit adventurous. What makes the better leader out of the two?
You know the answer.
No, I'm asking you.
Well, the answer is obvious, because unless you've learnt, how can you deal with things? And the other thing is, people say, well, he did something illegal, and so that should discount him. And apparently he was having problems, but he was worried about being excluded from going to the US because of this. But at the end of the day, about 1 in 5 of the population have used cocaine, and just over half of those have had an addiction problem with cocaine at some point in the usage of it.
Okay, let me ask
statistics.
Okay, so let me ask you another question. So, in terms of addiction, is that a natural trait of your personality or character, or is that something that develops over time because of your emotional state?
A bit of both. And so this is the question that's being weighing heavily on the minds of the medical and psychological community, because the original famous findings of the Vietnam veterans. So in Vietnam, a significant proportion of the US conscripts were abusing heroin. A huge amount. I mean, it's something like at least 20% of them were taking heroin, if not more. But when they came back to the States, only a tiny minority of those were actually addicts. And it was those who were not socially integrated back into the American society. Those were the addicts. And therefore the issue here is one of social integration and gainful employment. And indeed in Norway they did exactly that. They legalized illicit drugs, and instead of sending people to prison, they actually gave them therapy and sent them to work, and I think they paid half their wages for the first year just to get them back into work, and it massively improved the problem. Simply putting people in prison doesn't work, and of course that's why we have a failing prison system, because a vast number of those are from illicit drug use.
And here the question is: should we actually imprison people who are drug addicts? Or do you actually imprison, or you mainly imprison the drug dealers and give them far heftier sentences?
Well, you see, the problem with that is that drug dealers bribe people.
What, sorry?
Drug dealers bribe the police, so a lot of the major drug dealers never go to prison.
No, they don't. But
in fact, you know, being an ex-policeman yourself.
Right.
Not that you were ever bribed.
But the people on the street corner who, and actually I think he came up with an interesting statistic a few months ago, actually, about, is it really worth being a drug dealer, because the return on investment's not really that good, considering the risk to
being a gangster is not... being a gangster doesn't give you a good return on investment.
Doesn't the two go hand in hand?
No, not at all. I mean, a lot of drug dealers are not gangsters. They can be quite school preppy people.
Okay.
But
no, actually, that's I recognise that as well. But
in fact, in the States, being a gangster, you have something like a 25% chance of being shot dead every year versus I think it's a 6% chance of being put to death on death row.
But isn't part of their income and their trade is to actually control the streets, mainly to be able to supply of drugs?
Well, yes, you'd have thought that, but only the big guys make the money. So the foot soldiers make so little money that a lot of them have to moonlight in McDonald's, and a serious study showed this. And people live with the dream of being promoted, but it's a bit like a lot of the corporations in the city, that at the end of the day, you simply, people don't leave the top job, and so when gangsters rose to their fame and rose to their heights in the 80s, those people are still in the top jobs. They haven't died out yet.
Well, actually, and here's actually what's happening quite interesting in the market landscape at the moment. I was doing some research, I think actually last week it was, and it was about the CEOs who are now staying longer in their position than their over 50s, because they are seen to be the more capable, more disciplined, or whatever the reason is. But also that people who are in their 70s, because obviously their pensions are not going to cover their lifestyle anymore, are actually working longer, which means in that mass market type area, which I call the death zone, actually, of the working level. It's becoming even more populated, because the over 70s are actually working. You've longer. You've got all these other, you've got all these new entrants from the global economy coming in. People from university are starting their own businesses because they can't actually find a job to actually match their degree. So they're starting up on their own. So there's all these people populating that middle area, and as I said, of the market.
Well, you see, think about it this way: all these large corporations. Well, no, not all, but many of these large corporations are fairly recent. I mean, eBay, Amazon, Tesla, they're all fairly recent. PayPal, they're all fairly recent. And Virgin, and the boss is always the boss. The boss doesn't say, right now it's time for the next person, do they? The banking system included. So there's a logjam of people. And the only way that things can really free up is by the creation of a new company. So there is actually very little career progression in these type of environments.
Interesting. So anyway,
there's just hope.
Yeah. So going back to this drug thing, for example. So you had all these interviews, like even Jacob Rees-Mogg, and all the questions just being constantly asked now by the interviewers. Because have you taken cocaine? Have you taken this? Have you taken? And it's almost as though it's almost that if they actually, it's a double whammy question really, because if they answer them and they deny it, and then it comes out later, then they're also seen as a liar. And it's really probably an unfair question, because everyone's entitled to their own personal...
Well, Boris Johnson did it really well, didn't he? He said there was a white powder which may have been sugar and it may have gone up his nose. That was his answer.
And you do things when you're kids, and that's actually quite... and what's funny is that, because we just looked at the stats, and it's like 12-year-olds are more susceptible
people start at 12.
At 12 years old to things like
something like 10%,
cannabis and
10% of 12-year-olds are taking cocaine.
And why is that? Is it because they just part of their environment and they actually want to sort of fit in? Because let's face it, at that age we just want to be part of that peer group, don't we?
That's right.
We need that level of connection, so we're willing to do things. So depending on what your the social demographic type influences around you.
But remember, just over half of those are going to have a substance abuse problem
as they get older. Well, and that is a big. And I said this is the question I asked you right at the beginning.
1 million people in the States that equates to, by the way.
Well, actually, in the States it's even worse because that